had the dream of having a computer on every desk. We all know how that one turned out. In 2015, at an event very much like this one, he said, and I quote, "If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's mostly going to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Part of the reason for this is that we have invested much in nuclear deterrence, but we have invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We are not ready for the next epidemic." 5 full years before the COVID-19 pandemic. Very prophetic words. As we sit together, finally, after 2 years, to discuss a better normal, I could think of no better person to begin the end of the conclave with a vision. He is often the man who has seen well ahead into the future. And that's why his newest book, which is titled How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, should have us all listening. Welcome, Bill. It's my greatest honor to host you at the conclave. Before I hand over the session to my colleague, Rajdeep Sardesai, with everything that we have seen in the last 2 years, do you see your ability to foresee things as a gift or a challenge?
Well, it's certainly a gift. I feel very lucky I get to work on innovative new things. Also, when you're as successful as I am, you have a responsibility to use that to save lives as much as possible and to drive innovation to help solve the big problems, whether it's making us ready for the next pandemic or avoiding climate change.
Bill Gates, pleasure, honor to have you here at the India Today Conclave. We are going to focus on climate change because, as we said, this is the issue of our times. This is something that you've been deeply involved. We are calling you a climate change warrior in that sense. But I want to ask you, Bill, what made you engage with the issue of climate change in the first instance? Was there a trigger moment, a news headline, some personal experience that drove you in this direction?
Well, I like reading about science and, understanding weather and all sorts of things, but it really was my work in Africa for the Gates Foundation, where we work on nutrition and health, for the entire world. But what we were seeing was that the climate was already making farming near the equator far more difficult. And I decided I better learn about that because, if you're going to uplift every country in the world, understanding is climate going to hold that back and force us to do the whole economy in a different way. I felt I needed to know that. And so, I spent about 10 years starting in the year 2000 learning about that, and actually gave a TED Talk in 2010 where I warned that that is a huge problem that we're not doing the right things for.
But from that period, when you first got engaged with the issue of climate change, has the thinking evolved, changed in terms of the scale, the immediacy, the urgency in a way of climate change? Has your thinking in a way deepened as you read more about it, or as you witness around you, as we all are, these extreme climate events?
Yes, so the awareness that we've got a huge problem that'll get worse over time is much higher today than at any time in the past. A big milestone was in 2015, the Paris climate talks, where I and Prime Minister Modi, President Obama, and 30 others, we put the idea of innovation on the agenda. It was called Mission Innovation, and the idea was to get the R&D budgets of all these countries to go up, and I committed to do what's called breakthrough energy, where we would take the ideas and make sure that great companies were funded to turn those ideas into products to avoid climate change. So we have so much more to do. This is such a hard problem, but we're better off. The awareness, the government thinking about this, we've come a long way since 2015.
You know, if you had to convince the naysayers, because there will be always naysayers about the climate emergency, are there 3 top facts or anecdotes that stand out for you that you would choose to communicate simply and effectively to tell people, look, you know, we can't wait for tomorrow. This is a crisis of today.
Yeah, with climate, there is no quick solution like inventing a vaccine. You know, the pandemic, of course, has been an incredible tragedy, but we will see the end of it because of the vaccines. Climate change, you have to start the work to stop the emissions now to avoid disaster later, because the scale is so big and the number of areas of activities that create these emissions are so broad that there is no, you know, in a year, 2 years, come up with a solution. So the pandemic is much harder, but it's good. People, I mean, I hate to say it, but the climate negative effects now are alerting people to this. And particularly for countries near the equator, that includes India, the effects over the course of the century will be very dramatic. You know, the ability to work outside in the summer, the crop productivity, the weather systems, it will be dramatically different if we don't act in a huge way.
You know, what really impresses me about what you're trying to do, or should stagger us, is just the scale of what is required to be done. You've been speaking about the need for zero emissions at a time when you know, we need to decarbonize, according to you, 70% of the world economy. That sounds daunting in a way. How do you sort of impact on scale? Which area do you zero down on and why, so that you can impact on a scale of the kind that you're talking about?
Yeah, zero's a very tough goal because it means we can't just take passenger cars. We have to do planes and trains and trucks. We can't just do industry, steel and cement. We can't just do agriculture, or heating buildings, or making electricity. We have to do every one of those areas. And today, the cost of the green product to make steel or cement with no emissions is over double the current price. And so the cost to go green is simply unacceptable, even for the rich countries, not to mention middle-income countries like India. And so the path to salvation is huge innovations, including things like clean hydrogen or direct air capture, or, you know, scaling up electric cars and electric trucks to a super high level to take over the way we presently do every one of those activities.
You know, you've taken from my next question, Bill Gates, because apart from striving for clean energy, what are those 3 to 4 innovations that you see, or 3 to 5 areas where you can have maximum innovation for real opportunity? You spoke about electric cars, for example. What are those areas that a country like India in particular you see going forward, where we can actually make a difference and impact on scale again?
Yeah, so it's great that electric cars are starting to catch on. It's still a very small percentage of the market, but as those batteries become cheaper for cars of all sizes, they will become popular, and the government will push them with tax credits and encourage the market to shift. Likewise, for making electricity, the cost of wind and solar has come down. And so India's also installing large amounts of solar. And so those are two areas of progress that scaling is very, very hard, even in the next 30 years, to get rid of all the emissions there. The other sectors, though, if I had a magic wand, I'd say we need something to solve the industrial sector. The thing we talk about the most there is this hydrogen, clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, that if it was cheap enough, we would use that instead of hydrocarbons to make things like steel or natural gas. And there's lots of good ideas. Breakthrough Energy, my group, that includes a lot of partners, including Mukesh Ambani is one of the investors and board members in that. We're investing in a lot of companies who have new ideas about doing that cheap hydrogen. And then the big companies are now looking, okay, how far are they going? Should we partner with them and do this with big numbers? So that's at an early stage, but that would be a huge thing. You probably need 10 areas of innovation, and so we have to, that's where the R&D budget is the beginning here, and lots of risk capital, but only 2 or 3 inventions won't solve the entire problem and enable all countries, not just rich countries, all countries to get to zero.
The world releases, and these figures are important at times in a way to tell people about the scale of the problem again. 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year. You've been talking about bringing it down to zero. I mean, that sounds something like an environmental equivalent of a moon landing. How do we achieve this sort of paradigm shift, the breakthrough moment? I mean, you're a technology person, and many wonder whether there's a tech break that can actually fix the problem. Is there a technology, in your view, that can fix the problem, given the sheer scale again of it?
Yeah, I can absolutely guarantee without technology breakthroughs, it's just too expensive, and the world will have such a tough time saying, should the rich countries who've done the emissions historically, should they fund all of this? How do we convince everyone where you have to take pain now to get the gain later? And of course, if people say, hey, don't build any new buildings or don't travel, that's unrealistic. Of course, the rich countries could, build smaller houses and travel a bit less. But if you take the world as a whole, where you're just now getting to the levels of basic living size and transport, the idea of reducing the consumption, that's not going to work. That would be, impossible to do and not just in any way. So we're going to build a lot of buildings, but we need to do that in a clean way. We're going to have a lot more cars, but we need to do that in a clean way. So this is the hardest thing humanity's ever done. Harder than a moon landing, which that one actually worked. Here, it's all over the world, and the scale, when you drive around, you'll see cement plants everywhere. Every one of those has to make a change.
As you write about climate change, as you talk about it, Bill Gates, what's your top force feeling that comes in? Is it anxiety, or is it a sense of hope? How do you look at the future?
Well, I'm very lucky that I've seen huge innovations in the digital space in my Microsoft work, and that, has been profound. I've seen huge breakthroughs in the health space with new vaccines, saving children's lives from diarrhea and pneumonia, and our foundation has been part of that. So I bring that same sense of possibility that if we tap into the most brilliant minds all over the world and we create the right incentives for them, that yes, we can solve this problem. Anyone who thinks it's going to be simple or we can do it quickly, sadly I can prove to them that that's not the case. But it is very necessary, and so in the last 6 years since that Paris event, we've done some of the things we need to do, not nearly enough. So we have to continue that. And, the milestone of this COP26 in Glasgow in November, hopefully everyone's saying, okay, it's still not enough. We need to do more.
What I sense from you is hope and anxiety coexist almost. Would that be the way to put it? If there's something that's triggering hope, is it that people are far more conscious today about climate change? World leaders are far more conscious, policymakers today, than they were, say, even a decade ago?
Yes. This is, particularly Europe, I would say, is in the vanguard of making this part of all of their economic policies. The US sometimes is good on this, sometimes is not. Sadly, I would say that the awareness will be growing in India because the recognition that among the challenges India faces is that the temperatures in part of the country will be very high. I mean, worse than it will be in Texas, say. And so I think the strength of going to the world and saying, yes, we'll do our part, but only through massive innovation are we going to be able to achieve it. That will grow. And, we have about 10 years to invent everything and then about 20 years to roll it all out to hit that goal of zero, down from 51 billion by 2050.
So your anxiety is about India? Because we are seeing, as you just said, a gradual increase in temperature. We've had a monsoon with climatic events, cyclones, heavy rains, landslides in different parts, the rains extending to parts that normally were desertified almost. Is that, is any particular anxiety about countries like India?
Well, yes, the closer you are to the equator and the more you have farmers who just a few bad years, lead to worse malnutrition, they are in many cases not going to be able to grow enough to eat. Now, we can help a bit by giving them far, far better seeds, better water management type systems. But we also need to reduce these emissions. Otherwise, the temperature increase will mean that some areas are no longer suitable for human farming.
Is there a world leader, a role model, someone inspirational, whether it's an activist, a politician, someone you've met, a young innovator out there who makes you feel positive? Is there someone, some experience you want to share with us of someone you've met who makes you feel hopeful about the future when it comes to climate change?
Yeah, when I spend time with these new companies that I've been lucky enough to invest in through Breakthrough Energy, I see so many great ideas. Now, many of them won't work, but for each of the key areas, we have at least 5 companies that believe they have an approach. So it's only through innovation that I gain hope here. There is a lot of policy work. Europe, gets by far the highest grade of really making this issue front and center for them. And the world needs that because the rich countries have a lot of the innovation power, and we need to tap into that, even in areas where the breakthroughs on things like steel and cement, they haven't been the sexy areas for smart people to go work in, but we're trying to change that right now and get more of those brilliant minds engaged.
Conversely, are there any leaders or corporates or whose attitude or blind spots or tardiness makes you feel worried or dismayed in a way, Bill Gates? You can be frank about that here.
Well, historically, the oil and gas industry did confuse the consensus on climate. And, that was self-interested and, very unfortunate because with the science as complex as it is, any sort of uncertainty or doubt means it's harder to get through to the Democratic voter who they set the priorities for the country. And so, that whole idea that in the United States, at least, the Republican Party has not made this a priority. Now, I'm very hopeful that young Republicans will see it, and they may have different idea of how to solve the problem, but they'll see it as a priority. In most other countries, all the political parties agree that this is a very, very high priority. In fact, a lot of the money that's being allocated coming out of the pandemic in the US and Europe is labeled for these green projects, which will advance the innovation.
But in your view, is technology going to be the most important solution, or is it going to be political leadership that provides the solution, corporate leadership, policy changes, or dare I say, human behavior of civil society, citizenship that is going to have to embrace climate change and its solutions?
Yeah, we won't be able to get there without all three of those. Governments will have to help create markets so that even when the electric cars are a little more expensive, they get purchased and that volume will drive the price down. So eventually the extra cost, what I call the green premium, will be zero. That's ideal. We need to do that across all these areas. For electricity, the solar panels, at least during the day, that electricity is actually cheaper than running a coal plant. So we have some good examples where we've gotten there, but I'd put government at the top of the list because building this new grid and shifting that physical economy, their policies have to accelerate this at almost an unnatural speed in order for it to happen. So, policy is on top, but without innovation, the cost, the sacrifice that we'd be making people to make is just far too large.
Bill Gates, you've done a lot of work in India, working with people on health, on improving livelihoods. And as you know, in a country like India, just keeping people's livelihoods going is a huge challenge. How do you then convince those people about the urgency of climate change? Is there something specific that you would advise to tell the Indian people about the urgency of climate change at the moment?
Well, sadly, this emergency, like many, if we don't do the right things, the poorest are the ones who suffer the most. And so it's a farmer who barely gets by with today's climate who will find themselves not able to grow enough food, the crop failing many years, and unable to even work outdoors during part of the year, particularly closer to the equator. And so this is a great injustice. The rich countries have a particular obligation to exercise their investment in innovation to cut the costs of green products by over 90%. We can already see some leading companies like Reliance working on, okay, what do these products look like? How would we scale up solar even more? How would we get this green hydrogen so that, it's affordable? Because the key point is, you're absolutely right. You cannot expect the average Indian citizen not to still expect more travel, better shelter. Those things are, it's just human decency that we can't stop building new structures or, making fertilizer. And so innovations to multiply those large-scale activities by zero in terms of their emissions and policies that accelerate that, that's where that I get my optimism and belief that yes, if we bring everybody together, this can be done.
Just a question that, we've just slowly, perhaps, we still don't know, creeping out of the pandemic. But if I were to ask you, Bill Gates, between pandemics that you warned the world about not too long ago, the fear of a virus, disease, terror threats, the other big challenge of the 21st century, traditional war, economic disparity, which I know has troubled you again, climate change. What would you pick as the greatest threat of our times?
We're going to have to be able to work on multiple fronts at once. I mean, we still have to have the fire department and the army, for those threats. We do have to invest in pandemic preparedness. And I have, of course, a lot of ideas about that include innovators like the Indian vaccine manufacturers will be part of the solution of how we do that better next time. So if I had to say the toughest problem of all may be climate, because you have to do hard things now to avoid the problem later. In some areas like health, things will keep improving. I mean, I'm impatient. We haven't eradicated polio yet, but we're close. We should eradicate malaria and measles and invent the tools for those things. And a lot of the work we'll do for pandemic tools will actually help on those problems even when there's not a pandemic. So the world has enough wealth and enough right people to solve every one of those problems. It's just, getting the right people, getting the right level of cooperation. There are days where it looks like, wow, is the government going to come along and do its piece here? But I've dedicated my time to climate and health. Those are the two I know, because I do think we can solve both of those.
Bill Gates, you spoke about 2015, Paris being an important breakthrough moment. COP26 in Glasgow. Do you see that as the next big step? What's the outcome, the best case scenario for you?
Yeah, so the sense that countries need to up their commitment, these meetings really do help drive that. We're not going to have for quite some time enforceable commitments or big tariffs for people who don't go along. Eventually, we may need that for the last few who don't cooperate. But for now, we're getting global cooperation by sharing best ideas, by talking about which innovations will bring these costs down. And so, yes, COP26, if we get all the leaders there, the pandemic is making everything more complicated, but if we can get the leaders there and we hear stronger commitments, like China's talked a little bit about not financing coal plants. If they really follow through on that, both domestically and internationally, I view that as progress. The commitment to R&D, will celebrate countries like India, which really did up their R&D, and that, could give us breakthroughs like nuclear fission or fusion or the clean hydrogen type approach. So we'll reinforce the good behavior and the good practices, and then hopefully everyone ups their game. But only by constantly improving those commitments do you get to the 2-degree ceiling on the total warming. So it won't be a done deal, but yes, it's an important milestone.
One final question, Bill Gates, from someone who started as the great innovator of the computer and gave us something that we all have on our desktops today, to all that you've done for the fight against malaria in Africa, the work that your foundation does here in India on healthcare in particular, to now climate change. What keeps Bill Gates going? What is it that drives you day after day, night after night?
I enjoy my work, I think, as much as anyone alive. I get to meet with great scientists. I get to meet with politicians and business people and figure out how do we make this real. And I'm enjoying learning about cement and steel and all the challenges there, and meeting the entrepreneurs, funding those entrepreneurs who are going to deliver these breakthroughs. So, one thread runs through all my work, which is innovation that gets out to the world and makes the world more equitable. And now I devote all my time to a mix of the climate work and the health work.
Well, all we can say, Bill Gates, from here at India Today, stay young, stay inspirational, keep inspiring, and keep helping to make the world a better place. So thank you so much for joining us here at the India Today Conclave.
Great to talk to you.